Hey guys, welcome back to Rust Admin Academy, where I teach you guys the very best tips and tricks to owning and operating your own successful Rust server. On this channel, I do a lot of plugin reviews and tutorials to help answer any questions that you might come across as you're setting up your servers. So if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you stay up to date on everything that we're working on, and turn on notification bells so that you get notified as soon as I upload a new video. If at the end of this video you took some value out of it, do me a favor and hit that thumbs up for me. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, today is the day you asked for it, and finally it's here. So in a previous tutorial, you watched me give you a real broad sneak peek into a plugin that's coming out in the hopefully near future, called RaidableBases. But because that plugin isn't publicly available yet, a lot of my viewers are trying to use RaidableBases instead. RaidableBases is a plugin by Nivex, and it's available from the Umod website. I'll put a link to that in the video description down below, as well as all of the links that you're going to need for this video. So before we get started on the actual plugin itself, I want to clear the air a little bit. So when I did the sneak peek on RaidableBases, I may have indicated in that video that I was saying that one of these plugins was better than the other one, RaidableBases versus RaidableBases. While I was preparing for this video, I actually learned that they're two very separate plugins, and they have two very different objectives. So while the functionality of them might be similar in that they spawn bases on your server and it does it automatically, yada, 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 the actual purpose for each plugin is completely different. Now, I'm not going to try and explain what each one of these developers was thinking when they were creating these plugins. That's Nivex and the top secret developer that I'm not announcing to anybody yet. I don't want to assume what their thought processes were when they were creating these plugins. I just firmly believe that they had two very separate directions that they wanted to go. They had two very different objectives that they wanted to accomplish with these plugins. So bear that in mind going forward. So today I'm going to show you guys how to actually set up RaidableBases. And I know there's going to be a couple of things that I'm going to miss. So there's a lot of people out there that are struggling with this plugin. I'm not really sure why. The plugin itself is quite good. I can't really figure out where people are struggling, but whatever, we're going to dive into it. I'm going to show you guys what I did on my test server. So before we get too far into everything, there is one plugin dependency that you absolutely have to have, and you're going to want to be comfortable with in order to make it work with RaidableBases. So RaidableBases actually uses a plugin called CopyPaste, and that's available from the Umod site. I'll put a link to that in the video description down below. But RaidableBases uses CopyPaste to actually place the bases. It doesn't design the base for you, and it doesn't build the base for you. You actually have to do that, and I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to get around that so that you're not building a bunch of bases before you can actually use them on the plugin. So if you don't already have it, make sure you get CopyPaste and you install it onto your server. Once that's done, I want you to actually go into your server, and I just want you to build a whatever base. It doesn't even have to be a base. It can literally just be a one block foundation if you want. And I want you to go up to it. I want you to go into chat. I want you to do /copy_test or whatever, just a random name. You'll get a response back from your server saying the structure was successfully copied as test, or whatever name it is that you use. The reason I suggest you do this is because if you don't, the copy paste data folder won't have appeared yet in your Oxide data folder. So that will force the creation of this folder. So going forward, you know exactly where the files need to go for the bases that we're going to use. And once you're done with this base, you can just delete it because we're done with it. We don't actually need it. I just wanted to show you a quick and easy way to make sure that that folder gets created. So this right here is my Oxide folder for my server. And if I go into data, you will now see that I have a copy paste folder right here, which you won't. If you just install copy paste and you don't do anything else with it after that, you won't have this folder. So that's why I'm showing you a way to generate this folder. You could also, of course, just go in and manually put in a folder and call it copy paste. Just make sure it's written exactly like it is. No spaces, no capitalized letters. It will accomplish the same thing. So if we head back over to the Umod website, we can search up RaidableBases by Nivex. It's available for free. I'll put a link to it in the video description down below, of course. He's got a couple of videos on there that show how it actually functions once you actually have it up and running. You can check out those videos if you'd like. And then right below that, he's got this big written out warning for you, letting you know that this is a very complicated plugin, and it is. As you can see what I have highlighted there, the author of this plugin actually states the words, "It is extremely advanced and very intimidating to configure." And he's right. It it can be. The configuration file alone for this plugin is quite large, probably one of the largest configuration files I've ever seen. If we continue scrolling down, another one of the features of this plugin is that it creates a custom grid of your server, of your island. What this grid does is that it determines for the plugin where it's going to be allowed to spawn bases. And it's actually quite cool. I'm going to show you what it looks like in game. After it's created the grid, you can actually see it. You can physically see it, and it's super cool. I want to show you guys. And then of course we've got some permissions, which are always important. And then we've got some commands down below that, which is also very important. So make sure you guys go through this and familiarize yourself with the different commands that are available for Raidable Bases. And then he's also got a huge tips section. There's a ton of really good information in there, so make sure you guys check that out. That's another thing too. I want you guys to actually read this entire document. I know it's huge, but I want you to read it all. Nivex even suggests that we read the entire documentation before we even attempt to install this plugin. You can also make it so that these are buyable events. So like a team or a clan or a group of players, whatever they are, can actually buy a random base. It will populate and then they can go and raid that. We're not getting into any of that today. The section that we are going to get into today is the scheduled events. So this is the automation process of this plugin. We can associate costs. Obviously, if we're going to be selling these raidable base events, we have to create a way in order for the players to make money. So that's either using economics or server rewards. Either way, this plugin has the ability of working with both economics and server rewards. Anyways, I'm not going to go through the entire documentation with you guys. I expect that you guys are going to do this for yourself, because if I find that people are having complications with this simply because they didn't read the documentation that actually comes with the plugin, that's on you, not on me. So after we've installed Raidable Bases, let's go into our Oxide config folder, and then we can open up the Raidable Bases config file. Now, this is the document that is very large and very intimidating, but if you just break it down and go through it line by line, it's actually not that bad. So I'm going to point out a couple of important details that you need to make a note of that should hopefully make this a little bit less intimidating once you look at it. Okay, so let's break down this configuration file so that it's a little bit less scary to look at. So the first section that we're going to deal with is the percentage of probability of having a base from each one of these difficulty levels from spawning in. So if you want to have a majority of easy bases spawning versus hard bases, maybe you set it up something like that. So 80% probability for an easy base, 15% probability for a medium base, and 5% probability for a hard base. And you can change these, you can adjust this to whatever you feel is going to work better for your server. Maybe it might be beneficial at the beginning of a wipe to only have easy bases spawning in, or a higher likelihood of easy bases spawning in. And then as you get closer and closer to the end of your wipe cycle, maybe you want to increase how many harder bases or how many medium bases are spawning in. Just something that you have to decide for your server. We can control on which days which bases will spawn in. So like, let's say that your server is maybe slower Monday through Thursday. We can just have easy bases spawning in on Monday through Thursday and wait for the medium and hard bases to only spawn in Thursday, Friday, Saturday, let's say. Just throwing it out there. It's actually kind of cool that he put this in here. This is a really cool feature. There's quite a few different benefits to this. Basically, during the slower days, maybe you don't necessarily want to have the more difficult bases, because the more difficult bases actually have better loot in them. You don't necessarily want somebody to be left alone on the server or in a very small group of people on the server, and then they can just go and get rich off of these high tier bases. The functionality is there. You can decide what to do with it. The next section below that is basically a group of parameters for the plugin itself to abide by. So these parameters are just for the entire plugin itself. It has nothing to do with the different tier levels of bases. We'll get into that in just a second. So make sure you go through each one of these lines, and seriously go through it line by line and determine whether you want to have this feature turned on for your server or turned off for your server using the true or false toggle. The next section that I want to bring your attention to is the map marker. So that's what it looks like when the player brings up their built-in map, what this actually looks like on that map. The default marker name is set at Raidable Base Event. The radius of it is 0.25. Do we use a vending machine marker, etc., etc.? You can obviously see the information that you can control just with the map marker there. So it's pretty cool. So this is the section of the config that allows you to make it so that your players can buy these events. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea, but you need to make that decision for yourself whether you want your players to be able to purchase these raidable bases. So by default on line 123, this is where we get into the scheduled events section. So how many bases do you want to automatically spawn on your server, and at what interval do you want them to spawn? So if we want to have automatically spawned bases on the map, we need to change this to true. The convert PvE to PvP is only applicable on servers that are running PvE true. So if you're only running a PvE server, you can make it so that this area turns into a PvP area, even though the rest of the map is only PvE. So how often do we want to spawn a new base in? For testing purposes, I'm going to put this really short. So we spawn in a whole lot of bases in a really short period of time. You don't necessarily want to do that on your server unless you do, maybe you do. So I'm going to set this up so that a new base spawns between every 60 seconds and every 120 seconds. So maximum scheduled events. So how many of these bases or events do you want to have spawning on your server? If you have limited resources, I would suggest you keep this number fairly low. You don't want to have a whole bunch of bases on your server because they do require resources. That is going to put a drain on your server a little bit. It has to. But for testing purposes, I'm just going to make it so that we have 100 of these events all over our server. Maximum players required before we actually start one of these events or spawn one of these bases in. I'm going to leave that at 1. Default is 1. You can change this to whatever you want. So basically what that means is, what's the minimum number of players that can be on your server before these events start happening? If you are using economics or server rewards, this next section is where you determine how much each one of these events costs based on the difficulty level. Okay, so I've skipped over a bunch of the generic parameters that are important for this plugin to work as a whole. Like I said before, I want you to go through each one of these lines and make the decision for yourself whether you want to have that feature turned on or turned off, what the value of that parameter is that you want to be using on your server. There's just too many parameters to go over to get finished in a 10 or 20 minute video, just being honest with you. So the next section is where we're actually dealing with the bases themselves. So you can go into your server and start creating bases that you want to be a part of this plugin. And that's exactly what I did here. So I basically just came into my test server and I built this, what is this, a 2x3 with an airlock on the front of it. And I put storage boxes in here. I also put a TC in there and I left everything unlocked. So all of these locks are open and all of the doors are closed. Once we're satisfied with our base, we can do /copy, and then the name of this file is what's important. So we need to call these bases Nivex1, Nivex2, Nivex3, and so on and so forth. And just to keep it easier in your head, you want to have Nivex1 kind of your easiest, your simplest base to raid, and then gradually getting higher and higher in difficulty as you increase that number. So we can just copy this as Nivex1. That's fine. It has now saved this base into our CopyPaste folder so that the plugin RaidableBases can refer to it to grab the information for this base. So that's one way of doing this. The other way of doing this is actually downloading bases from the Fortify workshop. I've done videos on this in the past, so if you want to reference those videos, I'll put one of these videos in the YouTube card in the top right hand corner right now. You can check that out. I'm going to quickly glaze over it really quick right here, right now. So if you're quick, you might catch all the details. So what I do when I want to import a base from the Fortify workshop, I just go onto the workshop itself and I actually find the base that I want to import into my server. Once I've found one, I click on the subscribe button. That's all we need to do. Now this file is linked to our Steam profile and we can bring that into Fortify. I'll show you what we need to do in Fortify. Once we're in Fortify, we can just click on the workshop button, top left-hand corner. And then on the left-hand side here, we'll see a list of the bases that we're subscribed to on the workshop. And as you can see there, the top one is Spiral 3, which is exactly the one that I just subscribed to on the workshop. So we can click on download and there we go. It shows us in Fortify what this base looks like, which great. If you want to, you can make some changes at this point, but whatever, we're just going to blow right past this. So what do we do with this file now? We click on the workshop button again to get rid of those workshop options. And we want to click on this button right here called Rust CopyPaste JSON. So what this does is it converts this file into a JSON that we can just dump into our CopyPaste folder and it will then be readable by our server. So click on that right there. We also might as well change the name of it. So let's just call this one Nivex2. It'll do a little bit of stuff to your base. It finds the center point, etc., etc. And then it'll dump it into your Fortify saves folder, which you can then upload to your server. So for now, we're done with Fortify and we can close that out. You're going to do more work with this because you want to have at least 6 of these bases used. So Nivex1, Nivex2, Nivex3, all the way up to Nivex6. So as you can see from my CopyPaste folder, I have Nivex 1 through 6, but I'm missing Nivex 2. So we're going to replace Nivex 2 right now. We're going to upload a file. We're going to go to, your location might be a little bit different. So you're going to want to navigate to your fortified data saves folder, wherever that happens to be on your computer. And we want to grab Nivex 2 right there. So once our green bar is done loading that server, that means that Nivex 2 is now uploaded to our server, and we'll be able to go in game, and then we can type in paste Nivex 2, and there we go. So that is from Fortify into our actual game server in a matter of minutes. Okay, so those are the two different methods that I use in order to import bases into my server. I've either created them myself or I've downloaded them from the Fortify workshop. Either way works. And if you want to be able to change these bases up a little bit here and there, all you have to do is replace your files under the Nivex 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with the new base designs that you want to use going forward. Now, I'm going to make some assumptions here because I don't have a direct line of contact with the developer of this plugin. But I think what he's done has divided the difficulty levels up into Nivex 1, Nivex 2, and Nivex 3. Nivex 1 being the easiest one to raid, Nivex 3 being the most difficult one to raid. I'm not really sure, and I know that you can change these parameters so that it matches that if you wanted it to, or you could make it so that they're all easy bases. I'm not really sure what the thought process is there. I would have assumed that we would have had like an easy section, a medium section, and a hard section, and then which bases in there we wanted to spawn in for that category. However, that is not the case here. So once we get to the raidable bases section where we're actually dealing with these Nivex 1, 2, and 3, this is where this document starts looking a little bit repetitive and very intimidating. So if you break this next section down into 3 different sections, Nivex 1, Nivex 2, and Nivex 3, it makes it a lot simpler. So if we start at line 181 and we scroll down to 339, that is one category. So the Nivex 1 category. And I want to say that that is like the easy level, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily look that way. So let's go back up to the top. So for Nivex 1, raidable bases Nivex 1, we get to determine what other bases we can use for this category. By default, it's set up that we're going to use Nivex 4, Nivex 5, and Nivex 6. So these are all of the different parameters for when we're spawning in those bases. So do we want to have stability on? By default, it is off. And if you're downloading bases from the Fortify workshop, I highly suggest that you leave stability off. Otherwise, sometimes they'll fall apart. We can change the height for each one, etc., etc. So when looking at this, for Nivex 4, these are all of the paste parameters for Nivex 4. Scroll down a little bit. These are all the paste parameters for Nivex 5. And this here is Nivex 6. I mean, that makes sense. But down below that, because this is the way C# is written, this is the paste configuration for Nivex 1. So it's down below everything else. It's okay, that's just the way C# plugins are written. Down below that, we get to determine how we want to have our arena walls set up, or if we even want to have arena walls set up. So if you want to have walls automatically spawn around your base, you just make sure this is set to true. By default, it is. How tall do you want to have them? Let's make our level 1 bases 2 walls high. Yes, we want to use stone walls. Let's make the radius of this just a little bit bigger. We're going to make this a radius of 40 instead of 25. Now, down below this, we get to determine what our NPCs are going to do, how many of them are going to spawn, and what kind they are, and what they're going to wear. So you can change these up. You can change the clothes that your murderers are going to wear. You can change all of the parameters of the NPCs that are automatically going to spawn to defend your raidable base. Down below that, we get to determine how many of each one of them we can spawn in. Let's just change this to spawn in 10 instead of 3. We'll leave the aggression level at 70. Do we want to despawn their inventory on their death? Do you want your players to be able to loot the bodies of the NPCs that they kill? If you do, you want to change this to false. This will make it so that their inventory stays on their body and your player can then loot their dead NPC body. We can configure how much health they have for murderers and scientists. Anyways, we don't need to go through this step by step. You just need to go through each individual line and make a decision based on that line. We can reward either economics or server reward points for successfully raiding a base. We can change what the base is built out of, even though we've already determined that by whatever we've built or whatever we've brought in from Fortify. We can still have the plugin make the change so that your higher tiered bases are automatically HQM or your lower tiered bases are automatically wood. So let's do that in this case. Let's change tier 1 to wood. So even though I built one of those bases out of stone, the plugin is automatically going to convert this over to wood. And you're going to see that happen once we actually have this plugin running. The next section below that is how your base is actually going to act. So we can control different things like how the auto turrets perform, how good their aim is, how much ammo they have, how much fuel is in the flame turrets. All of these can be determined by this section here. So all of this section from line 181 to 338 is all dealing with Nivex 1, or what I believe to be tier 1 level bases that are going to spawn on your server. So right below that, we go into Nivex 2. We're not going to go through the same thing on Nivex 2 because you're going to determine which other bases you want tier 2 to be able to use. And then all of the exact same parameters that we just went through on Nivex 1, you're going to do that for Nivex 2 and Nivex 3. It doesn't take very long, 5 or 10 minutes, and you're going to have this document done. It's not as difficult as people are making it out to be. So once you're satisfied with your config file, it's very simple. You just need to save this and reload it. And because of the scheduled events section that we determined on our config file, it's as soon as we reload this plugin, it's automatically going to start spawning these bases. And in my test case, it's going to spawn at a ridiculous rate. It's going to spawn a new base between every 60 seconds and every 120 seconds. So between every minute and 2 minutes. Like I said before, you're probably not going to want that to be the case on your server, but make that decision for yourself. These bases are going to be resource heavy. So I'm just going to click on save. I'm going to go back to my console. In my console, I'm going to type o.reload raidable bases, and let's get over to gameplay. And then within 60 seconds or 120 seconds, you should see in chat that it's going to start spawning in some bases for us. So the first thing the plugin is going to do once we've reloaded it is actually create that grid that I was talking about earlier. So my grid has actually successfully been created. We can do /RB space grid. And like I said before, this is going to show you everywhere on your map where it's potentially going to spawn a base. So each one of these X's that you see is a potential base location. The domes that you see there are obviously the monuments that are pre-existing on your server, because the plugin needs to know that too. It needs to know where all of the monuments are. All right, so as you can see in chat there, it has already started spawning bases, which is good. So let's start checking them out. We can open up our map and you can actually see on the map where these bases are. So let's go check some of these out. And as you can see, it creates a dome over the raid base. And because of the wall parameters that we used, it put up these arena walls around it. And there we go. There is our spawned in base by a plugin. Here's our NPCs just rolling around. We got a couple of murderers down there. We got a couple of scientists down there. So as we can see on the map, this is a green circle, which means that it's a tier 1 or an easy tier base. Let's head over to this other base over here, which is also an easy level base. And there we go. There's another easy level base, and the NPC is upset that I'm so close. So one thing that I did want to warn you guys about is you might end up with this happening. So what is happening here is the plugin is thinking that the top of this power line is actually ground level, when in fact it's not. You can have this happen in the scheduled aspect of these events. It's just the nature of the beast. The algorithm isn't quite there yet, but I'm sure now that he knows that this is a possibility, I'm sure Nivex will fix this. So I would highly suggest that you go in and remove this. You don't want this on your server. You just don't. It just looks bad. So anyways, that's just a really small snippet of raidable bases. There is a ton of parameters that you can change for each different category. For the entire plugin itself, there's a ton of things that you can change. You can change the loot that is available from each tier of bases. You can change what spawns on the NPCs that are defending your raidable bases. You can change everything. There's nothing about this plugin that you can't change. And the ability to switch up which bases automatically spawn is a cool feature. The ability to sell these things, so a clan or a player even can go in and just purchase one of these raids. You can set that up too. And they can also determine which difficulty tier they want to actually raid. Tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. It's actually tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, whatever. It is what it is. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. I also would like to mention that I'm not trying to make a comparison. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I'm not trying to compare raidable bases versus random bases. They each have two very different functionalities. If you want to have an event that is created for something for your players to all, convene on, then, you can do that with raidable bases. Now, obviously, as I was showing you guys for demonstration purposes, I spawned in like 100 of these bases. You probably wouldn't want to do that on your own server. You might only want to ever have one at a time, and that's fine. So every 15 minutes, it starts a new event, deletes the current base, places another base at a different location. Now everyone has to convene on that base. There's a lot of different customization you can do with this plugin. So just get into it, go slow, read the details, and actually really pay attention to what you're doing. There is an amazing amount of information that you have to go through in order to make this plugin function the way you're going to want it to. Well, I messed around with this plugin for about an hour before I started recording this video, and I understand that there are a lot of people out there that are struggling. I'm hoping that I've connected some of the dots so that you can get past those struggles. I'm not exactly sure what people are struggling with, because like I said earlier, this plugin worked quite well for me. I didn't really run into anything that I didn't know what to do with. So for those of you that are struggling with this plugin, leave your comments down below. Let me know what you guys are actually struggling with so that I can try and replicate it on my side, and then of course I'll give you the answers to your questions. Before I shut down this video, if you haven't already done so, make sure you check out my Discord. I'll put a link to it above me. I'll put a link to it in the video description down below. We just recently passed 800 members in this Discord, so there's a ton of resources out there for you to get answers to your questions, and if you feel comfortable enough, you can start taking on some of these questions yourself. If you feel like supporting my efforts on this channel, make sure you check out my Patreon, patreon.com/srtbull. As a Patreon, it comes with a couple of Discord perks. Be sure to check that out. One of those perks, of course, being you get mentioned at the end of each one of my videos. So the list on the right-hand side of the screen right now is the list of brave men and women that have taken upon themselves to contribute a pledge to my channel. So I appreciate every single one of you. I cannot thank you enough. I hope you guys will check out some more videos from this playlist. Check out the boxes on the right-hand side of the screen right now. And of course, if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to the channel. All right, that's it for me. I'll see you guys next Friday. You guys make sure you take care of each other and stay safe.